Gentlemen, the time has come once again to discuss things.
Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Geeky Gentlemen. I'm Sid Partu. Joining me today is Geek for Fun. So Alfie, how'd you enjoy Tales of the Green Lantern Corps Volume 3? I'm sorry, I don't want to have any conversation tonight. Like, literally, we've been recording, we've been talking for less than 20 seconds, and I'm like, no, I just gotta fucking know.
Okay. Alright. No foreplay is going to be a theme for this episode, I suppose.
Yeah.
Instantaneous gratification. I'll stay on topic.
Well, I don't
wait
have
around.
time I don't have time to wait for things, Alfie. I'm a man. I take it when I want it. You know, that's my vibe.
Why did Steve just had to miss this one, didn't he? Leave me on my lonesome for this boy.
So, for those unaware, by the title card or the thumbnail or whatever, we're reviewing Tales of the Green Lantern Corps Volume 3, which is, I guess infamous would be the correct word, because it begins the relationship between Hal Jordan and Arisia, who's always been like younger character, like a teenager that Hal was like a mentor to, and kind of like in books previously, she was like the like young glowing eyes into the core kind of thing. There's a famous Alan Moore story, Mogo doesn't socialize, and Tomar Ray is telling her a story about Mogo, and she's just, you know, like this kind of sweet, innocent character who all of this is just brand new to, and she was, you know, just the readers in for like the younger readers at a point in time. And then, for whatever reason, good or bad, Steve Englehart, in his run on Green Lantern Corps, decided, I want Hal Jordan and Arisia to fuck. And it's one of those things where I literally cannot quite wrap my head around it. I don't know if there were like higher plans and intentions than what was done over time. This is one of those moments in comics that I think just baffles the mind and most certainly did not age well. So Alfie, what do you think?
I think interesting thing before we talk about the actual meat of the story, because everything outside of that I actually was surprised by, and there's some low points here and there, but there were some really interesting ideas I hadn't thought of before with this era of DC that I want to talk about once we get into the main thing of stuff, specifically how this book like relates to Crisis. I thought was really, really interesting. But in terms of like the landscape and maybe giving a reason why that happened, I did some looking up of just general creative feelings, and the reason Steve Englehart took this job, it was like a dare of Green Lantern just doesn't sell. Like, you just can't get Green Lantern to sell. Nobody cares. You can't make this book good. You can't make people interested in this book no matter what you did. Denny O'Neil tried it. If he couldn't do it, who do you think you are to do it, right? So he came on the book, and around 6 months during his run, and when he left, I don't know if that's the extent of his run or if he stayed on longer after that, because I only read these things, but like tripled in sales. Like it became one of the best-selling DC books. It became really, really popular and really, really strong. And the reason for that is very specifically rooted into the era where Englehart kind of took Green Lantern and turned it into Teen Titans slash X-Men. At the time, the biggest book on the stands is Chris Claremont's X-Men. The other biggest book on the stands is Marv Wolfman's Teen Titans. And both of those books are team books that have intrigue and plots outside of the team, but the main draw and meat is interpersonal team drama, and specifically sexual teen drama. Those were the only two books on the stands where Spider-Man would have like a spicy encounter with Black Cat or Mary Jane, but like it wasn't a group affair. It wasn't them all kind of living in the same house and having opinions on the same thing. The success of Teen Titans and X-Men had a lot to do with bringing those like soap opera tropes into comics. So when you apply that to Green Lantern of cool characters, which you think it wouldn't like fit at all with how it works, it actually reveals like, oh, you can easily make this a team book. You can make this an ensemble cast. So we'll get into the nitty-gritty details of like maybe where they went wrong with it. But if you track the immediate pitch of we want to make Green Lantern sell, what sells at the moment, and that is teams and sex, I think it paints a pretty clear picture of how we get here.
So I actually don't know a lot of the history of that around the time. As far as being a Green Lantern fan, a lot of the classic stuff pre-Johns I'm not super well versed in, so it's kind of interesting to learn that history behind it. So in that case, do you think that this is kind of a what's the word? Is this like clickbait? No, bad publicity is publicity. No publicity is bad publicity, kind of thing. Just trying to shock people with like the YouTube thumbnail kind of vibe.
I would say to an extent. I think behind a lot of the pitch probably is, wouldn't it be shocking if we've been... Because the character existed in the books for a decent period before this, but this is her first kind of like major role as part of the cast. But she was a prior established character, and the crush on Hal was a prior established thing. Knowing how like comic book creators are, and like them sitting behind on tables and what they suggest to each other, I guarantee it probably came up of, why don't we just have them fuck? Wouldn't that be crazy? Wouldn't that get people to talk? Like I'm absolutely sure that is probably something that came up along the things. We might want to clue in more of the specifics for people who might not be as familiar with just what we're exactly talking about with Hal Jordan and the kind of the lore and the backstory behind that.
I mean, this is like a weird time in comics because so at this point you've got Hal running around with a ring, Guy's got a ring, and John's got a ring, and like Hal had been out of the loop and basically been like fired from being Green Lantern for a long time. John had kind of taken over the main Green Lantern book for a while. Guy was coming and going. I actually just, because I saw you posting images, I decided to read the issue that follows the final issue we read. And it's about like fucking Guy Gardner had brain damage. Comics are so weird, man. But yes, there's a lot of like just, you know, regular comic continuity of a billion things going on, but with Green Lantern and it being kind of a legacy book when it wants to, it just is, it's again one of those things where it feels like they just wanted to do a shake-up. And so the shake-up this time is, let's take all of the like popular alien characters and just put them on a team together in the main, like in a book, and just set it on Earth, because that's the only planet anyone actually cares about. And so you get Chip, who's the squirrel. It's like pretty iconic for just being the Green Lantern that's a squirrel. You get Salak, who's like usually portrayed as the Guardian's secretary and a bit of like a busybody kind of no nonsense guy. You get Arisia, who is pretty popular, well liked character, and honestly I do quite like Arisia's dynamic with Hal a lot of the time. Like the Crush stuff, not so much. It's kind of like it's. If not for this, I might be tempted to say it's kind of cute in like it would never happen kind of way, but it did, and that's a problem. And then you got Katmatui and John Stewart, who are in a relationship together at the time, and they all decide to go to Earth and be on a team together. And who else shows up but Kilowog, who's arguably the most famous alien Green Lantern at this point in time, and yet this is his introduction story, which is weird because, I mean, I honestly thought Kilowog was around forever. I think most people kind of do, but this is 86 to 88. That's pretty late in the game, all things considered. So they're all like existing on Earth in a little house, little Green Lantern headquarters that they've built so people can come to them, and they're gonna solve problems on Earth and I guess within Earth's sector, but I don't think they ever leave Earth through the duration of the book for any significant amount of time. And so that's kind of the vibe that's going on. This all takes place in the backdrop of the Crisis event happening, the original Crisis happening. The Guardians apparently have left Oa and said that they are going to go off with the Zamorans to some other plane of existence, and that the next race of being to grow to Guardian level intelligence will arise on Earth. And so the Green Lanterns are going there to protect that burgeoning, growing cosmic intelligence. Does that about cover it? Oh, yeah. And Hal Jordan has sex with her.
Specifically, very much emphasized 14 years old in Earth years.
You want to know something that's really fucking amusing? This is like an infamous fucking thing for the character. And in all fairness, Hal Jordan has no shortage of these, given the fact that he also drove drunk and paralyzed someone in one of his origin stories. But, like... So when Johns comes on the book, years and years down the line, his fix for this, which... I don't know, I go back and forth on how much this is a fix and how much it's just, okay, it's an excuse, I just don't want to fucking deal with this, so here. His fix for this is saying Arisia is, or at the time that Hal and Arisia had a relationship, she was indeed 14 years old. But John's explanation is her planet is on an extended orbit, so really she's like 226 in Earth years. And that's really funny, because here in this book that the event in question occurs, she straight up says, "My planet orbits its sun at twice the rate of Earth. So really, I'm like 28."
Yeah, it's like in the book, which I was surprised because you've always brought it up as like this retroactive thing, and like he just took the explanation from the book and made it longer, and it's like, it doesn't matter how much time you add on to that, man.
Well, no, like specifically, he didn't make it longer, right? Because like an extended orbit, she's still 14 in Earth years. In the original explanation, she's just 28 in her own years. Whereas John's thing is, oh no, really, she's like 200 in Earth years. And I'm like, it really doesn't solve the problems of the fact that she's still a fucking teenager. And it's so funny that that's like the justification that like all the lolly fans in like the anime community have latched onto. It's like, oh yeah, she looks like a 7-year-old that I'm highly sexualizing, but it's okay because she's 7,000 years old. Yeah, no, it's still fucking creepy, bro. um, so yeah, it's just, it is certainly a choice. I guess where I'm torn up about it, or if I wanted to give it any rope, and this is probably all the rope it needs to hang me with, is it's not handled particularly well, but it seems like the way in which it's been written, the way in which Englehart is attempting to say something with it, is no one's exactly cool with it. Like, they're all at best like confused and weirded out. I like I said, I read the issue that follows the reveal, and it's like Katmatui's really the only one who's like, well, you know, she's a woman now. She says so physically and mentally, she's matured and everything. And I'm like, I. But everyone else is like, oh, this is fucking weird, man. This is creepy. And you just got like Salak who doesn't understand it back there, like, I don't understand emotions and mammalian urges and hormones. And it's, I don't know. It's such a weird decision, but it does appear to not be like the trope of comic book writer barely disguising their fetish. It does seem like he at least wanted to try to do something with it. I don't think anything does get done with it. I know as the relationship continues in other books, all right, Alfie, strap in for this one. It only gets weirder and grosser. Uh, because at least in this, it's like, no, I've physically and mentally matured. In other books, she literally starts acting like not even a 14-year-old anymore, like acting significantly younger, like a 7 or 8 year old. In other bits and excerpts, like there's a period where she's just living with Hal, and like he brings her home fucking lollipops and candy, and she gets like super excited, and it's not a good time, man.
Yeah, like that was the thing I was curious about, because Englehart is a very intelligent writer. He's a very good writer. And I know that mostly from his Batman work. But I wanted to be like, okay, this is an inherently really kind of creepy, gross subject matter, but it's not something that we haven't talked about in fiction before. I think the classical example is teachers having relationships with students, and it being discussed in media as just because it's something that's problematic doesn't mean it's not something that we shouldn't talk about as regards to the human experience. And like, okay, this is how this can fuck people up, this is how it can damage the young people, this is why all of this is a terrible idea, and fiction is a very good tool for exploring harmful subject matters like that. So I don't think inherently it's a bad subject matter to explore in the confines of a superhero story. I think that's something that you can make work. You just have to be very, very skilled with it and very, very talented with it. And most importantly, which I know none of these books had any involvement with, maybe ask a couple women for their opinions on it. What did it feel like when you had a crush on your school teacher, or older guys in general when you were younger? What would that situation be like? Etc. etc. Like, have some of that input on that.
Or I mean, talk to someone that has like had the experience of being on the power side of the power dynamic and feeling that that attempt of someone to get close, kind of thing. Because I think it's a perfectly reasonable thing to say that this does happen. I mean, I was shocked when this happened in my own life, but had a science teacher when I was in middle school, and I genuinely liked him as a teacher. He was a really fun guy. He did cool lessons. And then a couple years later, when I'm in high school, like this story broke about how like he was sleeping with a student, and it had been going on for like the entirety of her time there. And I was just like, I'll fully admit, with where I was at the time that I was immediately in disbelief that I honestly didn't think it had happened. I was like, I remember saying to people like, "No, I've met his wife. There's just no way because his wife is fucking hot." This was really the justification that I had in my head. But like this is a real thing that happens, and I don't know the particulars of that situation of how who approached who of what happened with what, but it isn't insane to believe that sometimes these people in power are approached by someone and the pursuant is on that person who's on the other side. Not that that absolves the person in power, but it is a real part of the dynamic, which seems to be, again, I feel like maybe I'm giving it too much credit here, but it seems to be that's kind of the thing that Englehart was playing with, because as established, Aresia did have a crush on Hal. And I don't love that detail, but it's like a workable enough thing. It's, you know, somewhat relatable to certain people, I'm sure. And Hal had always been pretty straight laced, and no, I'm not interested, and it's not happening. No way, kid. And that's basically how it starts here. Is several times in the first couple issues, Hal's shutting her down every time she starts to get flirtatious. There's even a whole scene where he like pulls her aside and like basically reprimands her for being so flirtatious with him, which is, I don't know if that's what I should say you're supposed to do in a situation like this, but certainly not the worst thing you could do. So I thought it was like, you know, you kind of reading it and you kind of want to give it credit of like, he knows what he's doing. But I don't know if it just, you said he left after a little bit, and I don't know if he just left the plot thread for someone else to finish, or he just didn't really care, didn't have a plan. He just wanted to do it for the spice, for the drama. But it just remains fucking something.
Yeah, and that's something where I think the major flaw here that kind of hurts, because we've been kind of trying to look at it from a way of justification of like at least the reasoning behind it, where some of my sympathy that starts to fail, because we got through the main issues, and at the end of the issues you told us to read, it's like it just when it happens, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we just get the last like panel of like the surprised shocks faces, which like legitimately made me like laugh out loud, because it was so like, oh my god, you're literally doing like the Family Guy like reaction panel at the end. This is insane. I really thought it was something that was a little bit more in tune with Daredevil smacking Black Widow's ass in like a Stan Lee's comic, right? And just being like, aha, like I thought it would be something that would be a little bit more like, oh, the error of the time is like, no, this is clearly a choice. This is clearly like a depiction. So I wanted to look into just, okay, well, I can't have a fully formed opinion until I know what he's actually doing with this. So I looked into, like you said, the next issue, where it's kind of the whole issue is basically just about trying to justify it. And we're given kind of lip service from like John about, he's like, well, you know, I understand what she's trying to say, but this is still pretty weird. I'm not a fan of any of this. But then it's like immediately dropped, and it's never and everyone just pretends it's normal from that point onwards. Whereas all the other arcs that were introduced in this initial bit, where we have the aliens being viewed as like something like, we can't have these Green Lantern aliens on Earth. This is like this weird thing from John's ex, where we're trying to like sow the seeds of distrust and unfamiliarity. And when we have Chip feeling alone after the crisis and stuff, like all of these things are still kept going as arcs, but this isn't until you get to other writers who feel they have to address it. Peter David being the main one who eventually breaks them up.
Thank you, Peter David. You're a saint.
Yeah, and it's like, it's really, really strange. Because of that, those earlier moments where Hal reprimands her, and those earlier moments where Hal tries to point it out, read less as he's doing the right thing here, and in retrospect, read more across Englehart is trying to portray that he's like fighting the urge Especially once you have that scene in the cave and she brings up the fact that he always refers to her as honey. Even as when he's telling her off for flirting with him, he still calls her honey the entire time. And like, that's a very, I don't want to be like, this fictional character did a bad thing. The book is bad, because I think making Hal Jordan a horrible human being and just someone who would do that with his view of women, completely in character. That's completely what he would do with that. That's completely how he behaved, like inappropriately around that thing, even when he's thinking. That makes sense, but it means from a writing standpoint, the arc it dovetails into feels more like Hal was the one in the wrong for not giving in sooner, and then when he does give in and she's older, it's a-okay from that point on. And that's such a strange choice, and what it reads to me as is this in the same comparison as we had with the Claremont X-Men? A little bit before this, I want to say like 3-4 years beforehand, X-Men introduces Kitty Pryde. Kitty Pryde is 14-year-old, spunky superhero who's involved in the soap opera dynamics of these other characters. The character she gets involved with and has a crush on is Colossus, who is older than her. By a degree, Marvel has kind of tried to fudge over the years. Because
Slaying
they eventually...
timeline, something.
Yeah, exactly. But in Claremont's run, it is very family standardish. At the very least, Colossus is 20 years old, probably closer to like 22, 23, and she's very explicitly 14. Colossus at that point in the series doesn't reciprocate those things like Hal Jordan does, but that's part of the arc. Is you introduce the teenage girl superhero. She's kind of the promiscuous one who wants to have a crush on the handsome guy in the team, and that back and forth is something that X-Men kept going for many years. It feels like Englehart literally just wanted to do that, and then once he realized he couldn't quite justify that with Hal Jordan in the same way, because Colossus, even just from the movies and stuff, is a very kind of like stoic, shyer, not so much a romantic kind of dude. Hal Jordan isn't that. If Hal Jordan has those advances, he's more likely to give in quite quickly. So I feel like Englehart wrote himself into a bit of a corner where he then just decided to change the pitch, and the age up is less of a this is an interesting arc, and it's more so I regret the situation. Yes, I regret the situation. I just want to have a love interest on the team for Hal Jordan now, and I've already done this much. Let's just age her up and get it over and done with, so now I can just have a girl Green Lantern that Hal Jordan is with.
Yeah, I think that is ultimately the fair thing. Like, there's that initial... Because I think this is with anything. I don't think this is just because I'm a Green Lantern fan. There's, like, fucking stupid racist moments in Green Lantern comics and history, and just in any fucking comic character. If you dig deep enough, there's just some awful shit, because they've been around since the fucking 30s or 40s. So it's not really me wanting to justify it for Hal's sake. I'm more or less okay with the fact that it's just been retconned away to make it okay, and just the idea that... And they will never have the same dynamic again in comics, and that's probably for the best. For me, I think it's just that when you're reading a story and you pick up on stuff, you want to have faith and trust in the writer. And when you don't have faith and trust in the writer, then you're reading something in bad faith, and there's really no point in reading it at that degree, right? If you go into a book looking for stuff to pick apart and tear apart and destroy, then you're never gonna be able to experience it the way it was meant to be experienced. So it's just a waste of everyone's time, yours, the writers, whoever the fuck you're going to talk to about it. So when you see these moments happening in the book, you're kind of like, oh, well, maybe it's going like this direction with it. I don't know if that's the best choice, but I guess I'm in so far already. Let's hope. And ultimately, all that hope is misplaced. I think whatever Englehart was trying to do, whether his intentions were good or his intentions were to drive fucking engagement and just, oh, everyone, can you believe it? Hal and Arisha are in a couple now, and just drive people to the fucking book out of shock of like, well, I gotta see this. whatever the intention is, ultimately it is just a really fucking reprehensible thing that unfortunately, and I feel like we've pretty much talked this into the ground, so I'm cool with transitioning over and talking about the rest of the book now if you want to, but which unfortunately just weighs down, which is what otherwise is a pretty decent story. I'm not gonna call it like top tier Green Lantern or anything, but I quite enjoy a lot of the other stuff in this book. Um, and you were mentioning it a little bit earlier, but did you have like another arc, another storyline that you were kind of impressed by or kind of into?
Yeah, the one that really kind of surprised me, and it's less so for the actual content, although I will say there are moments within it sprinkled through a lot of just the they fight that a lot of this boils down to at some point. um but there is some really interesting ideas in this relating to the aftermath of the crisis,
Mm-hmm.
and that's something that always really interests me just from a story perspective and like a comics perspective of how every other book had a different way of dealing with crisis, and it makes this period for DC like really really interesting because this is the first time it happened. So there's a real sense of like scrambling, but it's also the most successful time it happened, which I that contrast is like it's the least planned, but yeah, it's the one that really took hold the longest, and now everyone wants to come back to post-crisis as like real DC, and I think that's really really interesting. So once we deal with that, I had no idea because prior to this, my understanding was that only three people after post crisis remembered everything that happened, and not necessarily just these three people, but these are the only three people that I saw like directly mention it. That was Doctor Fate, that was Darkseid, and that was the Psychopirate. That only those three were the ones who continuously kept saying that we're the same versions of ourselves from pre-crisis. We've just kind of been put here. I had no idea, and you can clarify for me this if you know, but you said that you didn't know as much about this era. But from what I'm getting from this entire group of Green Lanterns, including Hal Jordan, seems to be like unaffected by the crisis. And when they return Earth, they're like, all right, let's see what the changes have happened after crisis. And like, that's not what any other character at the time did. So I'm just kind of fascinated by like, Hal Jordan is the same guy from pre-crisis as he is in post-crisis. I mean, he's the Silver Age dude with all that crazy Silver Age shit, and no one's going to address that. Like, that completely threw me for a loop. I was kind of like in recovery from that, and at first, I was just when I was reading it, I was like, okay, this is just a different approach to it. But then once we're a couple issues deep, we're not going to mention it. But then the entire Chip arc revolves
Around the
around the
crisis.
events of Crisis and the fact that he is the same dude from pre-Crisis. His villain comes down and has this whole thing where he's talking about his previous life and how he fought Chip many times and Chip's origin as Green Lantern. And when I'm reading this, I'm like, okay, are they just trying to ignore what they've established from the previous issue where they said Chip's history was changed because he wasn't with that girl that he's mentioning in this backstory? So is this just
Well,
we
Chip didn't
changed our
like
mind?
exist in the back on his planet anymore, and
Exactly.
it's a really interesting thing, and I think what you're getting is not that Hal Jordan and these other Green Lanterns were immune to the crisis the way that like Darkseid or Doctor Fate or Psychopirate are. I think you're just getting that like the writer at the time did not care and just kind of treated it as another story that happened in someone else's book and kind of was like, oh, so it's got big universe important stuff to it. Well, okay, my characters were off in space or probably like helped fight in the crisis at the time, so I'm gonna make them immune to it. And I think continuity wise is they're immune to it in the immediate aftermath, but not in the long term. Would be
Well,
my
what
my explanation. I'd have to try
I,
to fumble for.
I buy that So there's a precedent for it where like the same shit happens in New 52 where Green Lantern is completely unaffected by New 52. So like, I don't know, man. I take this as a fucking in the win column from the Ringy, and I'm not gonna lie, I just be like, yeah, if you're a Green Lantern, you're just immune from crisis. You just stay the same. Because like, I can't think of a single time when a crisis has happened that it's affected the Green Lantern chronology. Every time they've had their shit affected or retconned, it's been within their own books and their own events. They've never had a change from like an event.
I mean, I guess
So maybe they're
just
just fucking
built
immune.
different. They're just built different, man. The ring just has a fucking anti-crisis spray. Is one of the constructs they could make.
If you ever get a chance to write these books, just do me a fucking solid and just directly say an aspect of the ring is it's the ultimate power in the universe. You know what that means? It's like the fucking Infinity Stones. They just don't get affected by like these cosmic events. Just say it. Why not? It'd be fucking cool. So like that was something that was really interesting, and what I liked about that is the story with Chip. Where we have this very goofy premise of all these animal people, and you get a list of all these. The former Lantern was a raccoon, and I showed
like,
that
so
to
that
Aaron.
whole sector is just fucking animal lanterns, I'm guessing, or animals of different kinds. Because Ubex isn't from Chip's planet; he just invades it with his army of crab soldiers. So so Ubex is a fucking beaver, and he's got crab mercenaries, and Chip's people are. Like they're squirrels, but they're not squirrel size. They're about raccoon size from the way that you see Chip interact with other animals on Earth. And then fucking their previous Green Lantern was a raccoon in that section. So just that whole sector is all the animal species, just the woodland sector.
Which is just kind of fucking badass. That like it's this very goofy thing, but it's played entirely straight.
Yeah, so you said you showed it to Aaron. You showed Aaron the fucking Green Lantern raccoon.
Yeah,
What'd she say?
I showed Aaron the Green Lantern raccoon, and she was like, "Okay, you know what? He's cute. He could say." And then I said, "He died." And then she said, "Of course he did. The only interesting thing about Green Lantern. Let's get rid of that immediately."
It's just the origin. It's the origin for Chip, who's even cuter. What the fuck? Chip's adorable. He gets Arisha gives Chip a new outfit in this, and he's like, fucking little bow tie and overalls.
Yeah.
I've actually got a figure
cute.
of that Chip, funny enough.
That's pretty good. I like that. So like we go through all of that, and we have his whole thing, and like it's kind of got that very it almost feels like a little bit Kirby inspired with just taking this wild ass premise and just playing it completely straight and making it about the loss of war, like people returning home after war. And then you have this villain who also has this like ultimate weapon, which explicitly shows that he's able to survive the crisis with. So I don't know yet. I think this is in text that these guys have these shit that could just survive the Anti-Monitor, because he makes this stick that can just survive anything and do anything because it's tied to his will. So it's like an even souped up version of a Green Lantern ring. And he's about to finally get his revenge of Chip, and he has this moment where he's like, but because of the universe reset, no one knows me except for him. If I get rid of him, I will be alone. And because his will falters, everything collapses as everything breaks. Chip chases him down. The staff continues to falter, and because it can't be powered by his will, because he's lost his resentment, you get this beaver very tearfully like burning into flames, and it's like Chip's like, "Oh no, I don't want to be alone." And then Chip uses his Green Lantern ring to save him, to prevent the crisis from getting him, and then they just hug, and it's like legitimately like a really powerful scene. I really, 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 really like that, and that's the only book I've ever seen deal with anything like unironically, the closest thing in terms of dealing with multiversal effects that this book is goddamn Heroes in Crisis, where Wally West is talking about the trauma of coming into a world without his family. Like, it's literally the same arc with these fucking animal people. Like, Tom King has absolutely read this, and like it inspired him. Like, why don't we just do this with a mainline DC character? And it's great. I really, really like that stuff.
Yeah, it's funny, like, specifically the scene of, like, Ubek's about to, like, burst into crisis flames and Chip saving him. You know, as you were saying it, I didn't expect you to say Heroes in Crisis. I expected you to say DC Rebirth #1 with that fucking
Oh
scene
yeah,
of,
it is. Yeah,
like,
it's the
Barry
exact
and Wally
panel.
hugging.
That's a good example too. Yeah, that's spot on.
But fucking, like, look at the panel underneath him, like, Salak is crying and shit. It's so cute. I fucking love that chapter so much because it's just the most DC thing to ever DC, where it's just the fucking image of Chip's people being invaded, and there's like the police officer squirrel that's been like shot in the chest, and it's literally like showing the blood. I just fucking can't, man. It's like simultaneously so like ridiculous, and yet you're 100% invested because it's just playing it so straight. It's fucking ridiculous. I love it. I honestly love it. And like that's my thing with Green Lantern is these are the kinds of stories I like because so I bought this at discount. I've still got the price tag on the back of this. I got this book for $5 from Ollie's, which is like a discount warehouse thing. They got comics a lot of the times. I'm mostly just saying that so if people want to try to get into comics, hey, you might not have a comic store, go check out if you have an Ollie's because they got a lot of comics that you can get real cheap in like trade form. Anyway, so I got this from there and I saw on the side Green Lantern Corps Volume, or Tales of the Green Lantern Corps Volume 3, and I was like, oh shit, sweet, I've got Volume 2. I can't wait to read more great one-off stories that just kind of give you like a different vignette of a different random core member, and they're just like solid one and done stories. Because that's what Tales of the Green Lantern Corps Volume 2 is. It's not like an overarching story, there's no reoccurring characters, it's just like collections of either one and done issues that they released in the Green Lantern Corps book, or most of the time it would be the backups. So like I believe in My Tales Volume 2 has a reprint of the Mogo story, which is just Mogo's like original Alan Moore story that was printed in the backup of one of John Stewart's first stories, oddly enough. Or not first stories, but first stories as Green Lantern. And so it's interesting how this kind of got roped in with that. Also, it's really funny how the cover of my trade fucking ruined the cover art from the first issue of the series. I don't know why they decided to do that, but they did. Did you just read this online probably, so you probably didn't see the print cover of it, did you? Okay, but did you see the issue #1, or I guess issue 201 Green Lantern Corps comic cover with Kilowog holding the title?
Yeah, it's the Kilowog's holding the title and they're all kind of shooting their lasers, right?
Yeah. Okay, hold on. I gotta pull up the print cover for the trade. Tales, Green Lantern Corps Volume 3. Images. There we go. Right at the top. Okay. Look how they fucked the art, Alfie. It's honestly impressive, and like an impressive level of incompetence. Because this was they actually created more work. Why'd they do it? Like, they actually had to go through and like redraw Kilowog's thumb, and it's like weird because it's like, what the fuck's he holding?
I don't. Especially for like older trade books like this, DC does tend to just keep the original logo anyway. So like, why would you? That's really strange. I guess they were just trying to like get people who bought the recent Green Lantern stuff to buy it. So they were like, oh, let's make sure it's all the same branding.
Yeah, it's the modern logo for the book and stuff. But like, what I don't understand is just fucking fine, but just tilt the new title. If you're gonna go through the process of fucking like redoing art anyway, wouldn't it be better to just slightly warp or bend or whatever the fucking title so Kilowog can be holding it? I mean, his shoulders are pretty fucking square in this image. I don't think you really need to worry about it like overlapping anything on him. Just fucking have him hold the new title. What the shit?
Anything, it would, because it doesn't have the big logo down the middle, will actually cover less of Kilowog than the old logo does.
Yeah. So I don't know, that one kind of fucking threw me. But I'm glad you liked the Ubek stuff. That was pretty cool. I quite enjoyed it. I thought it was funny how it was like seeded as these like Earth villains not wanting a bunch of Green Lanterns, so they're gonna like storm them and shit. And there's like this one mysterious villain in each team up, and it's got like a completely new power. Speaking of that aspect, how'd you like some of these like classic fucking Green Lantern rogues and shit? Any of them bite your fancy at all?
No,
No?
very
Okay.
much can understand why they're like, yeah, let's just have him in space. Because like a lot of these now this isn't, because I know we talked about this on Twitter recently, but this is something where I think if you're gonna work with this, I'm a fucking Daredevil fan, man, and like if you look at his Rose Gallery, it's not exactly much better, but like a good writer can make them work. So I'm sure you could find an interesting take on some of these Earth guys. I would actually like to see a run like that. I would like to see an Earth Green Lantern run where we try and make these guys a little bit more fleshed out and just work with what you've got, because it is kind of the trick they do with Daredevil that I think works a lot is they make them like afraid of Daredevil, and a lot of them, except for like the big boys, aren't actually threats and are kind of like clear about like, yeah, Stiltman's never going to be the guy. Let's not pretend to force him over. Let's just find a use with him within a larger story. I think you could do something quite interesting with that with Polaris, where he's just kind of like, yeah, Hal Jordan kind of like saves the universe on the reg, and I'm like a magnet kind of dude. So like I'm kind of over my fucking weight class here, but I'm just gonna like that could be charming. Like you could have a fun dynamic where Hal, maybe being the adrenaline junkie that he is, maybe comes to Earth just to bully people sometimes when he needs a confidence boost. Like, maybe he's like sick of like having to fight fucking Parallax and demons and gods and all these all-powerful things. Maybe he just wants to come to Earth and like slap around a few of these losers sometimes and feel like he's Superman some days, you know? Just like have that element of being able to stomp people, I think could be really fun. Because he does, they get some hits off in here, but it's mainly because of Ubak and like his various different forms. Mostly, I think the idea of a bunch of villains getting together and being like, oh fuck, there's 7 of them now. What are we gonna do? Is like an interesting concept. I don't think it's executed particularly interesting. I think the last thing you'd want to do if there's 7 of these guys now and you couldn't beat one is like, well, let's just attack them. Like, I think Engelhart could have done a lot smarter of like, there's 7 of these guys now, we have to find a way to take care of this without physical violence. That would have been something a little bit more interesting to me, of because Green Lantern has to like order his ring to do a lot of like the sensing stuff. Like he has like passive protection and passive other things, but for like if he wants to like scan the city and stuff, he does have to kind of like direct that, and Hal's not as aware of like Earth crime and things, so you could do a lot of like playing with how maybe it's a bit easier to get past Green Lantern's radar than it is like the Flash or like Batman or something. Like you can have like a lot of villains go to Coast City because you can do a bank robbery in the middle of the day, and like if there's a pretty girl nearby, Hal's not gonna stop you. Like he's not gonna pay enough attention like that. So a lot of missed potential there, but I don't think it's something where it's unsalvageable. It's just there weren't any hidden gems here, I guess, to your main point.
I don't know. I don't love a lot of the villains. Some of them have like really creative powers. I think if we're willing to be generous, like we don't have like you've got what's his fucking name? That's not a good point in my favor. But the guy, like, you got one guy who controls gravity, can make people heavier. I like Whiteout quite a bit. I think that's like just a really fucking trippy power on maybe not quite on the same tier, but on a similar like, okay, that's just fucking weird level as like the Spot, where he's just yeah, I can just make parts of your body disappear. And, like, the rest of your body still moves as if they're there, but just how fucking disorientating that would be, I think you could have some potential to do some kind of cool stuff with. Not like an arc level villain, but an interesting issue. Particularly against Green Lantern, you just, okay, your ring hand is gonna cause some fucking problems. So I thought that was kind of a cool one, and could maybe be utilized better. Maybe it was utilized better in the past, because these guys really are brought in just to be fodder, just to like create problems and create fight, kind of thing. Sonar and like some of the other guys less so, but I don't know. I liked Whiteout. He kind of stood out. The fact that like Englehart just created villains for Ubek to be, I thought was kind of interesting, because you mentioned the X-Men parallel, and the fact that like Truck is basically the Juggernaut. I thought it was pretty funny. It's like the Juggernaut had sex with Optimus Prime. And I thought that was kind of a fun, just weird comics thing. Polaris is arguably one of Hal's bigger villains, outside of like the cosmic stuff. Maybe like Hal's biggest Earth-based villain aside from Hector Hammond. I don't know, there's like potential with it. I mean, it's basically Magneto's power set, so anything you do with him you could conceivably do with Polaris, but he's just not as interesting. So I don't know, someone needs to give Polaris a good backstory rewrite or something. But otherwise, nah, they're not great. Though again, just for like the weird powers shit, it's a couple issues in, but to the fucking Baron, what the fuck ever his name is, kind of was just very underutilized. Because I thought his initial like setup and power was actually gonna be kind of fascinating. Like again, just weird and trippy, where he just watches shit on TV and he can like make that a real person to do his bidding. But they're not like the actor or whatever. They're just like the character from television. And then it was just like, oh yeah, now there's 7 of me. That part was disappointing. But like, given that he was watching the fucking A-Team, because Mr. T is very clearly on one of his television screens, I was really hoping we'd get like fucking weird, trippy television villains versus Green Lantern. That just seemed like a really cool possibility. It's more or less spelt out that he died at the end of this, but since you don't see it, he didn't have to. So the door is open for anyone that may want to use it. Again, probably not a whole ass arc, but that'd be kind of a fun issue. Just fucking like, you don't even have to have them like fighting the Green Lantern character or whatever. You could just have it be around and be causing like chaos and distractions and problems. Just imagine like Green Lantern trying to deal with shit, and then the fucking like Dukes of Hazzard come fucking skidding the car by or some shit. Could be a good time.
The ones you listed specifically, Whiteout. I think the main issue I have with a lot of these, and I'm gonna throw this as like an accurate criticism because it happened about 10 years earlier when we were designing villains, and I always use this as like the gold standard for building a rogues gallery, and that's Dick Coley's Spider-Man. And I think the big issue with Green Lantern villains, and this isn't just him, but I think he's a really prime example, where we put a lot of time and energy and focus in crafting the fantasy of the hero, and we make this really cool power set for the hero to have, and it's a very specific power set, and yet it's also something that's basically got infinite possibilities. Like Green Lantern's just A1, good concept for a long-running adventure character. You can keep him doing new stuff for 8 years, no problem. The issue becomes is a lot of these villains aren't based around what would be cool for Green Lantern specifically to fight. The example I use with Spider-Man is genuinely with Spider-Man, there's either stuff that has to use his senses, be it Mysterio or Craven with his poisons and such. So Spider-Man has to rely on specifically his unique spider sense, or for a lot of his other villains, they're often more destructive and stronger than Spider-Man is, which enforces him having to dodge, and therefore if Spider-Man's villains weren't stronger than him, you wouldn't get cool Spider-Man poses where he's flipping and dodging. That's why Dr. Octopus is such a cool visual, right? It's because he has all these different arms he can attack, so you can draw Spider-Man in crazy poses, dodging those individual arms and stuff. Same with Electro, same with Green Goblin. A lot of those things are put into the thought of that. There's not a lot here where, like, making a construct to go against this is interesting, and normally they default to they also make constructs with like Sinestro and the other Green Lantern villains, and what I think is missed opportunity here is doing things that specifically counteract the thing you're using being external. The idea that Hal Jordan doesn't throw a lot of haymakers. He does when he needs to, but generally the ring is the one throwing the punches or doing the blasts, or it's like he's effectively got more something that's more of a long range way of fighting style, if you think that's fair. And I think having villains such as like Whiteout, which conceptually you could do a really cool idea where he's someone that, like, if you just fully went a little bit further of his powers, right, where if he touches you and sends that part of you to another dimension, it's just gone. It's effectively as if it's been decapitated and it just can't get back. So then the idea in the fight becomes you cannot let him get close to you. And so Green Lantern has to use all of these different constructs, all of these different things, and the advantage of his ring being something that can keep him at bay. You could have a really cool fight where Whiteout is wiping away his constructs and Hal's backing up and trying to do more and more and more. And then you have the reason he's Green Lantern is because he defeats fear, right? He goes into the bravery. So Hal goes in for a swing, and then you have a bit where Kilowog's like, you went in, and he could have, if you miscalculated that, you would have lost your arm. And he's like, I didn't though. And like, you took him out. Like, that would have been like a really cool, like, okay, that's a cool dynamic for Green Lantern to have, and that's just off the top of my head. More stuff like that is something I would like to see with this character, and I think that's been a problem not just in this era, but even to now. I think our solution for Green Lantern is either Superman style Groot who can punch really hard and Green Lantern has to be on the defense, or other constructs. And I think we don't put enough into what would be cool for Green Lantern specifically to fight.
No, I think that's a totally fair criticism. Again, I just like some of the oddness. Whiteout's just got a really weird power, and that's always
got a bunch
fun
of potential.
Yeah.
That's one I would like to see come back and have a different take with him. If they can do the spot like that, I think this dude is totally begging for a reinvention like that.
And then like dropped again, gravity powers. That's just kind of cool. The other big villain, besides the Baron, because again, just the TV thing was just a fun idea, but underutilized here. The other big villain that shows up in this, of course, is a character who did get a major reinvention. I'm not sure if you read Blackest Night or no.
I know of Black Hand, and I did read Blackest Night. It's been a few years though, but
yeah,
I did
like
read
you
it.
know the general concept of his reinvention, where he's like the servant of death. He's got the hand that like he touches things and they die. He can resurrect things and make them like his servants, kind of thing. So that's his new power set. This is his old power set where he had like this rod thing that could absorb Green Lantern energy and either redirect it or just basically give him the power to use the ring and not have to be worthy of it and not using like his own will. It's just, you fight me, I absorb the power, you use this thing to you use the power to manipulate a thing and throw it at me, and it can absorb the power that it touched. Which is, it's to your point about it's basically fighting constructs with constructs. I think it's a little bit more clever because it's actually like draining the ring as it's happening. So that there's a little bit something to that. But it is kind of interesting to see this power set for Black Hand. I do prefer the John's reinvention for like a number of reasons. The characterization, however, is fucking grating in this, and I don't like it at all.
Yeah, this is again, I think, a case, and DC had this really bad in the post-crisis era. I think the only exception to the rule here was Flash and Batman, um, where we really started, kind of ironically, as like we were thinking of like maturing like the books and making them appeal to more of a Marvel audience, because DC had the rep pre-crisis of being the younger adult books. The villains are actually like really less fleshed out than they were in the Silver Age. Like by and large, we spend a lot of time of when we make that they're stronger for sure, they're more of a threat in terms of physicality, and as the years go on, they certainly become more brutal. But because we have to keep treating them like this, they often get reduced to just wanting revenge and fighting, and there's not a lot more characterization with that. And I feel like in the Silver Age, when you had more of a focus on the one-shot villain, Flash and Green Lantern had this a lot, because I remember when I was curious about like the very like start of like Silver Age DC or a Superman thing, I reread some of those very early issues, and a lot of them are the villains aren't exactly deep, but they have a very clear we exist for this topic to get explored this issue. So the example would be Hal Jordan has to fight a villain that has to deal with the effects of re-entering the atmosphere. And the entire issue is about the calculations and teaching children the dangers of atmospheric re-entry. And this villain has the power to like engulf him in flames, etc., etc. That gives you at least a purpose for that single issue and has you get a focus around it, and you get a lot of cool set pieces, you get a lot of interesting choreography, and you give the hero a task to solve. And normally, because these villains would be in the frame of like we're still following comics from like the horror monster days, they'd often have like a tragic ending. They'd often be like, I was a monster reduced from fate, brought to this, or a life of crime was my only option. Or in Hal Jordan's cases, a lot of the time they would be like refugees, and the ending of the issue would be Hal helping them find a way home. Or if they died before they could find a way home, Hal would like swear like the purpose of the Green Lantern would be to make sure that no being, no matter their race or creed, will ever have to suffer and become a monster like this. Like it would be like a vow, and it would affect Hal. Very simple, very childish ways of doing it, but they have a little bit more purpose and depth than what we get here, where it is just now we're just supervillains. We're no longer threats. We know what superheroes are now, and so we must have supervillains to face them. And it just makes things a lot less interesting. And I don't know if you agree with that, but I think this is kind of the era where we start having almost, because we know what these characters have to be, and everyone's kind of morphing away from their individual niches to becoming more kind of uniformly, we're all superheroes. Like Superman is now a superhero. Superman isn't an alien weirdo, he's just superhero. Same with Wonder Woman, same with Flash, same with Green Lantern, to the point that they put Green Lantern on Earth and have him do more superhero stuff for this entire period until you get to Emerald Knight, basically. When all of that thing, I think, shows a lack of individuality and forcing, well, we've got to have supervillains because it's a superhero book, without any reasoning as to why.
No, I think that's perfectly fair. Again, this is definitely using the villains more to just give a story some action and help increase the drama, but mainly just to be the sideline to the character-driven plot. Because it's weird, I kind of like some of the stuff that goes on in the Black Hand issues. It's kind of a cool moment for Kilowog to shine, and again, it's just so weird that Kilowog's introduced so late in the game. The thought that Kilowog is a early post-crisis character just does not sit in my head whatsoever. I don't know how you feel about that. But then, just on top of that, like, you get some cool stuff with Kilowog versus Blackhand, where You know, Blackhand's got the fucking Angel Stadium balanced on the head of a giant pin, and Kilowog's gonna fight him without using the ring and just beat the shit out of him. This is kind of fun, cool little idea. Um, is it executed super great? No, no, and the fact that the focus of the issue is the Hal and Arisha plot is just like super fucking distracting. But for what it is, I enjoyed it. I agree with you where like okay, we know what these characters are. There's heroes and villains. These are how these stories work. Can get a little old. I agree, but just going back to it on occasion like this, I can find some enjoyment out of. Just for the simplicity of it and the fact that like Blackhand's the villain for 2 issues. It's not a fucking 20-issue arc to build up to a thing, and then really he was just working for this villain the whole time.
Oh my god. While we're on that, I just want to, because I have been negative with that just for the sake of like having something to talk about with critique and stuff, but I do want to emphasize what you're saying there of like, thank God how good comics used to be paced, where you'd have a story per issue. What a fucking concept. What a wild ass thing. You could go to a shelf, you could get your money's worth, and yeah, Hal may be banging a 14-year-old in this, but you know what? It's the complete beginning and middle and end of a story, and there's like 5 other things happening in this. Like, my God, the idea that if this book came out today, you'd be at 6 issues and the team wouldn't even be formed yet. They wouldn't have all met. They would have still be like, Kilowog will be saved as like the 5th issue cliffhanger, right? Of like, who is this new character, right? They introduce him here and it's like, oh yeah, that's Kilowog. Oh, you don't know Kilowog. We've known Kilowog for years. And like, I love introducing characters like that. I think that's so much more natural than being like, who is Batman's mysterious new enemy / ally, and will we ever and then never seen again for 5 years? Because you made a big deal about it, and there was no way you could realistically live up to that hype. So just don't make a big deal about it. If you want to have Batman have a new enemy or rival, just have Batman have a new enemy or rival that he fights. And like, we don't see Batman's every single day. He could be fighting 50 other villains we've never seen, and just like, yeah, I fought those guys for years. You just didn't see those issues. Like, it's so much more natural.
You know what a great fucking example of that is if you just throw a million things at the wall, you don't know what will stick, and there's power in that. The most modern example of I can think of with this is fucking Tom King and Kite Man.
Yes.
Tom King completely revitalized an interest in Kite Man that the character has never deserved. But like, legitimately, because of Tom King, Kite Man became a featured character in a goddamn DC animated series. I'm still trying to wrap my brain around that one. And all because it just, wouldn't it be funny if I had Kite Man say Kite Man, hell yeah? And then it just fucking took off, and then just kept doing it because it was funny, and now Kite Man's like, not the biggest character in the world, but he's just like a very popular, like, enjoys so much more popularity than he ever did before Tom King. And yeah, if you do that with new characters, like, you kind of dunked on Tinian's run a lot when it was going on, but respect to the man for introducing new characters and just kind of going with stuff, and not all of them worked, and that's, fine, but some of them took off. Punchline's still pretty popular, I think. So fucking good for him. Good for him for adding to the lore and doing new stuff and, having a bit of fun with it. So yeah, it's just kind of fun to see these 1-2 issue stories that cover a lot of bases. It's just enjoyable.
It's just this era of comics felt a lot more like, I understand why this was selling so many issues, because you're not coming here for the battles, because they're not particularly being done better than anything else at the stands, but I imagine just knowing what else was here in the post-crisis landscape, actually no, without a doubt, because this book didn't keep going, is this kind of took the niche that Legion of Superheroes had been taking for so long, that the Superboy comics had been taking for so long, where a lot of these books were being bought for people who just wanted to read about relationship drama with people who so happen to have powers. And this would fill that niche where, like, it's a talking point. It's just like if something problematic happens on a soap, people talk about it and wait for the next issue to see how it's resolved. Dealing with these different kind of adventures and stuff. Like, this is something that very specifically appeals to a different demographic than your typical Green Lantern fan, even, I'd say. And that's something I think should be encouraged. That's something I think comics really, if they want to keep alive in this current era, they need to maybe go back to a little bit more of having the single issue with a direct, clear audience in mind that isn't just superhero fans, and making it so if you just pick up that one issue, it's not a single closed off story because you want to have them come back next week or next month or whatever, but having something that will keep people talking and keep people engaging with the material. It's the same thing with why X-Men got so huge. And then whenever X-Men tries to shift away from the fact that the X-Men fans just kind of want to see a bunch of tortured hot people fuck each other, it always suffers from it. And I feel like it needs to just accept that. It's the same with Teen Titans. It's why the biggest Teen Titans fans will be like Corey, Dick Shippers, or Raven stans, or just Starfire fans on their own, etc. Where you have people who like these characters for the interpersonal drama and the interpersonal conflicts. And it's very weird looking back after how much it has changed. And you know this more than me, but how much the identity of Green Lantern was different. That going back to an era where it was rebooted to fit that audience. Whereas now, if you look at Johns' saga, they'd never enjoy. It's like a completely different book, and I think that's really interesting. It's the same with Kyle. When Kyle came out, it was a completely different book from either of those two. Like, Green Lantern keeps kind of reinventing itself to be a new book every couple decades, and I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, it's one of the few books that can do it. I just wish they'd like commit to it a little bit harder. My biggest thing with Green Lanterns, like, I like Hal Jordan a lot. I like Kyle a lot. I like all of them except Guy, to various degrees. Guy and Simon. Simon gets props for being the new Guy Gardner of characters I don't give a shit about and just kind of wish would die. But like, I really wish they just commit to it. It's got legacy built into the premise of the ring goes and finds someone else. And I just really wish they'd fucking commit to it and just go with it. Like, it's so awkward, and I think this book is a really good example of it, because so this is basically not Hal Jordan's direct reintroduction to the book, but him taking on more of the spotlight as the main character again. And he's taking it from John, who had been the featured character. And you and I have talked about John Stewart in the past, where he's a really great character in concept, and his early issues are fantastic, but he falls off fast and he falls off hard, and I think this is probably the beginnings of that, where even in the book itself, John's like, oh, I'm getting overconfident, I've been injured twice now. I think John gets injured in every issue of this book and gets sidelined so the other characters have something to do, and a lot of the time it's so Hal can be the hero. And you know, it's just kind of fucking annoying, because if the character, and this is not just this book specifically, but like throughout the history of the like mythos, if you're only going to have this beloved character sit on the sidelines, why have them there at all? Just let them die cool, you know? Like, I love Kyle Rayner. That boy has not done a fucking thing in years, except get less cool after he gave up the White Lantern ring. And I fucking hate it. What were you gonna say?
The comparison I'd use to keep with kind of the X-Men analogy is because even in this book, I was like, oh, this is like early Jon Stewart. I'm like interested in this guy, especially of this era. I think this is like he's probably the character outside of Chip that I was most interested in, like just reading more about, because I think Jon Stewart has a lot under the tank you can do with him. He's a lot more interesting to me than Hal. And then we go through this book, and he just kind of he's got a girlfriend now. Good for him, I guess. And that's kind of it. And as his whole, he gets a little bit of play with his ex, who's a reporter, who's spitefully trying to like turn the news against him. I think that's an interesting idea. I like the idea of having like a J. Jonah Jameson type figure who used to fuck you. Like I think that's actually quite an interesting spin on that concept. So like I would have liked for that to get brought around a little bit more, at least have a little bit more teeth to it. But you're right, he does get very much sidelined, and it's kind of the beginning of the end of it. And the X-Men comparison I was gonna go into is, it's like if you did your Claremont revival of the X-Men books to get them selling, and then you immediately were like, yeah, this Wolverine guy was cool and all, but I really want to get back to Cyclops. What's Cyclops up to? Like, how is he doing, you know? Like, that's really kind of how it feels like when Hal comes in to take the reins again. And that's, even then, I'd say is a bit unfair to Hal, because he's a lot cooler than Cyclops is. But it's the same kind of, you want to say you're new and fresh and committing to a new status quo, but you're baking into that new status quo that no matter how many times you phrase, I'm here at Earth, we're just all equal, we're trained equally with each other, Green Lantern is the same with everyone, right? And you emphasize that as much with Hal as possible. You're still giving it all to Hal at the end of the day, so it doesn't really feel like they're all equal. It feels like it's Hal and the buddies. And that's something which I think is probably why the status quo, anytime Hal is involved in these team books, it always kind of warps around his orbit to basically just being his. It's like when you have Bruce in a Bat Family book. It's just you can't pretend that they're all on equal footing if the main guy is there. Like you have to just either get him out of the picture completely, or commit to someone else being put over as the main guy. Like Miles Morales just cannot flourish as well as he can if he has to keep sharing the spotlight with Peter, and Peter isn't reduced into a minor role. Like that's the same problem with John, I feel like, in this era specifically, and it's probably why Kyle had that initial success and then they eventually walked it back. And I think that's a real, to your point about Green Lantern having that legacy imprint to it, it's kind of the poster child along with Flash of this. We want to commit to legacy, but we're never really going to in the same way. And I think that's always it's an interesting problem to have for those two characters.
It is. It's weird because it seems like the consensus continues to be it's time to move on from Hal, but he's just got fans that keep bringing him back, you know? Like, I think most of, if not all of John's run probably could have been done with Kyle and be fine. Because Kyle's whole thing was, is he going to be able to restart the Corps, like, proper? Can he bring it back, or will he be the final Green Lantern? And the fact that, like, Hal comes back and the Corps restarts, and Kyle's just kind of vibing for a good part of that beginning stuff. Like, I really like all the stuff that's done with Kyle in the Green Lantern Corps book that ran concurrent with John's run. Maybe even a little bit more than a lot of the stuff that was going on with Hal. Hal got the mythos, but Kyle got the good storytelling, if that makes sense. But at the same time, just Johns was a Hal fan, so he brings back Hal to be his dude. And there's funny precursors to that in, like, his Flash run, if you go read that with Wally. And so you just get this, I don't know, it leaves things in this very unsatisfying place. So, like, you know, Hal keeps getting brought back, Guy and John keep getting brought back because, like, someone gets on the book and it's like, this is the one I like, so I'm going to make the book about them again. and then eventually someone goes, oh, and I'm gonna create a new human Green Lantern, and they're never like as good, or not necessarily that, they're never as interesting as they are when they're first created again. And so it's one of those things where, like, maybe give it another couple years here, and someone will get on the book and decide to make it Kyle's book again, or give it like another 10 years, and someone will decide, no, it needs to be Jessica's book, but there will be like 17 other fucking human Green Lanterns by that point. I was trying to think about this the other day. So it's like it's kind of funny that the like whole thing is, oh, 7 Green Lanterns, we can't have that. That's a menace. All right, so Hal, John, Guy, Kyle, Simon, Jessica, Joe, Teen Lantern, Alan Scott.
Yep.
Fucking Dr. Polaris is shitting his pants, man. And that's just all the human ones.
A really funny thing to bring up an issue is like just them drinking at a bar, and they're talking about like how they keep getting like Mr. Freeze or someone is just like, I just can't think that it was at one when he had the kid. It was like, okay, so now I've got 2 targets, but there's like 20 people there in Gotham. I can't aim my freeze way. I don't have enough ammo for even in the greatest scenario. And then like Polaris just walks in, bags into the eyes, like, you think you've got problems.
At least yours are kids that aren't as good as Batman. All these fuckers are just as good as each other.
It's the greatest weapon in the universe. How do they keep giving so many of them? Do they just have these fucking things on an assembly line? How easy is it to make a fucking Green Lantern ring?
Actually, they revealed that in an issue, like right before New 52 started up. Ganthet was no longer a Guardian, and he was going to be the Green Lantern of Oa. And it's like they did a little like 2-3 page vignette about him creating a Green Lantern ring out of like pure will that has been like forged and boiled down or some shit. It's such a fucking wild sequence of panels. It was like, wow, they just really wanted. They had like no idea what to make an actual story about with this. They're like, all right, just fucking lore dump the issue.
Yeah. They just these things just I feel bad for any Green Lantern villain. Again, it's just like at least with most heroes you're gonna get like one coming at you, maybe them and the team, right? If you're an event book, you're gonna have like your goons fight off like the lower level ones. But like every Green Lantern villain has to come in with a fucking army, or else you're just gonna get jumped in the worst way. I really want a story where like an unaware Green Lantern villain that comes out and he just thinks Green Lantern is just ace. He doesn't know about the core thing. So he just thinks he's gonna fight Hal or something, and then like Hal's like, oh, this guy's like really strong. He's like a Superman level threat. I better call him back up. He's like, oh, you and your little friends. Who are you gonna call? Just like a million Green Lanterns turn up. It's just like, oh, come on, man.
That's not fair.
I remember in fucking Infinite Crisis when Superboy Prime starts fighting. They're just like a wall of Green Lanterns. They just throw at this guy. They've just got billions of these fuckers.
It's a good thing. It's a good thing they're a fucking like army. I did appreciate the like little press thing and the like Green Lanterns versus the press. That was kind of cool. But I also liked the fact that like when they're showing Tawny around the place and she's like, oh, so it's like an invasion now? You're an army? And it's like, oh, well, we're much more than that. The Green Lantern Corps is not strictly an army. I did like that they take the time to point that out, because it's something that gets lost and missed and, quite frankly, over-relied on a lot of the times. But just the fact that they establish, no, we're here to do more than just fight. We're not an invasion force, I don't know. I just appreciated that. That was a nice little, at the very least, lip service. But I'd say it was just a little bit more than that. So that was cool. So I've mentioned them a couple times, but I haven't really gotten much of a response for you. What did you think of these as Kilowog's first stories? That's kind of like the last big thing I wanted to talk about, since he's a pretty famous Green Lantern character by now.
actually quite liked. I think they did a pretty good job with him being put over because I think they actually made Kilowog seem quite cool in this. Whenever he shows up, he's normally the guy aside from Hal that's getting some shine to him. When there's that scene with Whiteout, where he like uses his thing that like completely incapacitates Erisia, and then he tries it on Kilowog, and Kilowog's just like, yeah, cool, I can't see my arms anyway, and just beats the fuck out of him. Like, and I'm just like, what I was kind of figuring was like, well, yeah, just because you can't see him, I was like, you still got your other things to just keep fighting. So the fact that Kilowog like addressed that, I think is really cool. I really like something I wish. Well, I don't know if I wish because I just haven't seen that much with him. But something I thought was a really cool concept is the idea that Kilowog doesn't even use his ring that much. Not because he's uncreative, but because he's almost like stronger without it. And I think that's like a really cool idea because if the ring can choose people, right, and like it's not like it's Super Saiyan where it necessarily gives you a stat buff. It's more like you're drawing from a power source and then you can apply that to things. I do kind of like the idea of like an alien race that has this like super strong, almost Kryptonian level strength that gets a Green Lantern ring and is like, oh yeah, I'm happy to be part of the core, but like I don't really need this like physically. I'm kind of good. Like I'll use like the additional benefits. Like I just think it's cool if Kilowog effectively has the Green Lantern thing as like a cell phone or like just something that's like used just very minimal, because when it comes to the fighting side of things, he's actually more effective and stronger without it. Like I think that's actually a really cool concept. And it makes Kilowog seem really, really like interesting and like powerful. I think that was really neat.
The Green Lantern core book basically runs with the concept you're talking about. I can't remember the character's name off the top of my head, but his design kind of looks like the Thing but gray. And his like culture his culture is a warrior race, but they consider using a weapon as a sign of weakness. You're only supposed to use your hands. And so it's like weakness and dishonor to use your weapon. So like he'll use the ring to fly from planet to planet. He'll use it to like translate, but he won't ever use it in a fight. And like the other members that are alongside him get annoyed with him for that because like, you're holding us back. You're not doing it right. He's like, I'm holding my fucking own. You bother with yourself. It's kind of a neat thing, but yeah, that's I guess you can see seeds of that with Kilowog. It's like I don't need it all the time. I use it when I need to, and the fact that like Kilowog's the fucking the medic on the team is kind of a neat thing that I don't think has really been run with at all. It's kind of funny because when they show him making the medical pod constructs, everyone comments on, that's the most complex construct I've ever seen. And it's really funny as a Green Lantern fan, and especially a fan of the animated series, to have like this really just iconic scene of the ship's broken down, they need a replacement part that will take like months to repair, and Hal goes, well, could we make a construct of it to just get us to Oa and back? And Aya goes, it would need to be accurate within 1/quintillionth of a degree. And Hal's like, can you do that? Kilowog just looks over and goes, I make hammers. So it's kind of funny how Kilowog's like adeptness with constructs and complexity has been lost over time, and he's just kind of become the big bruiser guy. But at the same time, I don't know, I fucking love him to death. He's a neat guy. It's very interesting to see these as his early days appearances. Because again, I was absolutely shocked the first time I read this that this is his first appearance in comics, because he's just such an iconic part of the mythos at this point. Never mind that they've like killed him 7 times over, but you know.
Yeah, that's the thing is I think Kilowog has always been one of those characters that like whenever you do that Ben Grimm archetype of just kind of like the heart of gold, big strong, almost like uncle, big brother type character in these things, it's very easy to make them just likable and lovable. And Green Lantern, I think you can have an interesting. Like it's a franchise that works particularly well with that dynamic because a lot of the Green Lantern figures, not just Hal, you've got Jessica, you've got Kyle, and John. They can all have different relationships with that kind of guy. Where Hal might need someone who's going to check him when he maybe goes a little too far, a little too off the rails, and needs someone who can physically restrain him. John needs someone who's got a little bit more of like that dog in him, who's like, well, yeah, you don't need to watch your tongue, you don't need to hold back, just be you, just fight, like, we'll be fine. You don't have to worry about seeming that you're not that people will think less of you if you do that. You can just go all out. Kyle desperately needs like someone to kind of look after him a little bit because he's so over his head with all of this. He's the nerd still, so he kind of needs the big guy who's going to beat up the bullies for him sometimes. And Jessica kind of the same way as Kyle, where if you're afraid of something and you feel like you need to get over those anxieties, having a big kind of goofy looking walrus, big alien monster dude just give you a big hug is like a very like fulfilling and natural character dynamic. So I think Kilowog is one of those characters that I think is just always going to stick around in the lore because he's very flexible, he's a very engaging, he's very simple to understand a member of the supporting cast. So no matter what you do with Green Lantern, you can always find a way to make Kilowog fit. And I think the Sinestro is the same way, where like the reason why those two have kind of survived everything and are always near the forefront in any adaptation or any show or any new reboot of the comics is because they're so flexible and that deal is kind of, you can work it around the ring.
Yeah, I think so. So it's just interesting to see some of the like little time capsule moments of this. So much of the mythos and just the whole universe of Green Lantern has changed between when this came out and now. And it's just fascinating. Salak's remarkably similar. It's like remarkably unchanged in any real regard, so that's kind of fascinating. And then Chip, I don't know, I like Chip's cool. Kapatui, I think, died at some point, and I think she's one of the few characters who has not been brought back because they replaced her entirely with Sornikin Natu, who is also from Kurugar, which is Sinestro's planet. So it's kind of interesting that she's one of the few that has like fully just been retired as a character. But yeah, I think that would do it. That pretty much covers all the bases. Weird book, man. Weird book. Don't know if any of it justifies the Hal Regis stuff, but it's just interesting to talk about. It's a relic. Let me ask you a question here, because I didn't have this thought when I like picked this to talk about, but especially seeing like the reaction from people in the Discord when you're posting just the out of context panels. It's just fucking hilarious to see, by the way.
Yes.
Yeah. Would you be interested in turning this into a series and like just you pick one and Steve will pick one of like the most infamous moments for characters and going back and looking at the story it happened in?
Sure, I'm down. We'll have to ask what Steve thinks before committing to anything, though. I think would be fair.
Okay,
But I know what I'd do if we do end up going with that.
Okay, so we'll talk behind the scenes and see what Steve's thoughts are. I think he'll be down because it sounds like just a fucking wild ride. But yeah, I think that'd be like a fun thing to do. Just talk about like infamous moments. Was it as bad as the fan base has made it out to be? Kind of thing. I think that'd be kind of a fun time. This, yes, it is just as bad as the fan base made it out to be. Perhaps worse. Just in case anyone was wondering.
Yeah, big time. This is more of an archival when you're looking through history books and you're reading old novels and you're seeing a lot of choice words that maybe shouldn't be thrown away so casually. This is more what this is an exercise in. So yeah, it was a interesting read for sure. It's something just for the chip stuff. I'm glad I saw with that part at least, because I think that post-crisis landscape is something I hadn't seen before, and I think that's really interesting. Everything else aside from that, though, is just like, come on, Englehart, why'd you have to do that? Why'd this have to exist?
Yeah. Choices were made. Were they the right choices? No. But they were made regardless.
Truly.
Alright, everyone. Thanks so much for watching. Until next time, I'm the Philosopher.
And I am the champion of pre-crisis.
And we are your geeky gentlemen, and we will be discussing things.